folks to just comment on whether or not it might be easier and cheaper and more cost-effective to study potential positives if the scheduling regime in the United States were relaxed to allow more efficient and cheaper and more ready studying.
Well, I actually think that one of the benefits of psychosocial interventions is that they have absolutely no negative side effects. So I would go in the other direction. If I were going to try to do things that were unusual, I would try to figure out what non-pharmacologic interventions could have major impact. For example, to go back to the chorus that we founded, nobody believed when I started it that people with dementia could learn new songs, and they are learning new songs. So this is a medicine that has no potential side effects. In fact, that we did a video of the original chorus, and one of the caregivers said, "Forget about pills, just give me this." Now imagine if singing could have a major impact on learning new songs, could have a major impact on neurologic function. And we don't think about those kinds of interventions.
No, I think what you're saying is brilliant, and I appreciate it, but I'm an all of the above kind of guy. And what might work well for one individual or entity might not work as well for another. But what you're doing is, I admire you. I simply submit that because one thing works doesn't mean another doesn't, and I believe we have a regulatory scheme here that's draconian at best. And
I agree with you on that, but I think that what you're talking about is thinking out of the box.
Yes, ma'am. Oh, no, again, we're not arguing, we're agreeing.
Yeah.
Mr. Spillane, am I pronouncing it correctly?
Yeah, well, not a doctor, don't play one on television. So a couple of thoughts. I wonder whether it's is it Schedule 1, or are there other things that prevent this kind of imaginative thinking about experimenting with these substances? So a couple of thoughts on that. One is we do have a pretty strong not invented here ethos in the scientific community, and I think that's made a little bit more challenged because there is a prevailing theory of Alzheimer's disease in the United States and in the United States science establishment that, although respected in other countries, they're investigating along different lines. For example, Mr. Smith, I don't want to correct you, except I will. I would add the Republic of Korea to your list of very engaged countries about Alzheimer's, also from a research point of view. Their drug mechanisms of action, remember, Alzheimer's has 3 parts. It has plaques, tangles, and inflammation. They're almost completely zeroed in on inflammation. And it's something that's almost completely not ignored, but it's not a mainstream in the United States. It's attacking amyloid. So I think that's just something to think about, is the prevailing theory keeping this out of consideration rather than Schedule 1. Last, our language about Alzheimer's treatments is most unfortunate in that somewhere in the 1980s, we started talking about disease-modifying drugs and mere symptomatic treatments. And we have minimized social interventions, we have minimized the drugs we have by calling them mere symptomatic treatments. I would submit, what is insulin? A mere symptomatic treatment? Yes, but it also, what do people want when they live with a disease? I can tell you firsthand, as somebody who has lived with disease, we want treatments that allow us to get on with our lives. So I think sometimes the language and holding out for, this is why I get really uncomfortable about, will we have a cure by 2025? We have this language we've developed in Alzheimer's about symptomatic treatment versus disease-modifying treatment, and I think that too is a barrier to people thinking outside the box. So maybe it's those other things that are going on in the Alzheimer's scientific thinking, not so much that it's a Schedule 1 problem.
Well, let me, at the indulgence of the chair very quickly, submit that while we search for a cure, in the interim, we should also be searching for treatments, right? That it's an all of the above, not a one or the other. And so while we hope one day to move away from fossil fuels, in the interim we're burning oil as we develop wind and solar, right? I mean, it's getting from point A to point B. But let me ask you this, and I'm leading intentionally because I can here. Would you not agree that Schedule 1 designation inhibits research and makes that more tedious and costly for those who might be interested in engaging in it? I was actually.
I can't.
I was
have
actually
never
addressing
had
that.
I have never had any clinical candidate that I was responsible for impeded in its development by scheduling. That doesn't mean somebody else might have. And honestly, in my time in the pharmaceutical industry, most of our interactions with FDA were actually quite helpful. They were leaning forward. Now, there are some areas that I didn't get into where there's some adjustments that need to be made, but I will tell you they were actually quite forward-thinking in their treatment about approval processes for Alzheimer's disease. I think they knew quite well that it was a very bad disease and were willing to work with any sponsor that came to them with any reasonable proposal about how to develop a treatment.
But if you want to work with willow bark, you don't need to get federal government permission to get the precursor. If you want to work with quinine, you don't need to, right? I mean, anyway, thank you for being here. And again, I'm not suggesting this is a panacea, just that we should get out of our own way and